She spent her life invisible, without love, without touch, without a name that mattered. He was the man who controlled everything, except for the ghosts that kept him awake at night. When their paths crossed by chance, the dawn became a stage. If you like stories of love and romance, watch until the end. You won't regret it. Subscribe to this channel and leave your comment telling us where you're listening to this beautiful story from. We continue. The London sky poured down rain that early morning. Eloise watched the drops stream down the window of the night bus, creating trails that intertwined like inevitable destinies. She got off at the final stop and walked 5 blocks to the imposing building that housed the headquarters of Cassian and Roman. It was her 3rd week as a cleaning assistant on the night shift, the only job she had managed to find after the death of her grandmother Lola. Entering the sumptuous hall, she felt the familiar weight of contrast, her worn shoes against the Italian marble, her simple uniform against the mirrors that reflected infinitude, her provisional existence against the permanence of power, carved into every column. She clocked in, 11:58 p.m. She stored her battered backpack in a basement locker and headed to the changing room. She could still smell the mildew on her clothes, a reminder of the flooding that had hit her studio flat in the East End 2 weeks prior. "Eloise!" Marlene, the cleaning supervisor, called out. "Today you're going up to the 43rd floor. Emergency cleaning. But isn't Jurema usually in charge of the executive sector? Orders from above. They specifically asked for you." Eloise felt her stomach clench. The 43rd floor was forbidden territory, the private sanctuary of Adrian Cassian, a man she had never seen in person, but whose name reverberated like a cautious prayer in the corridors. They said he almost never appeared, that he lived in an isolated mansion in the Surrey Hills, that he suffered from some condition that had made him reclusive and obsessive. Others spoke of a family tragedy that had transformed him. Nothing but nebulous rumors. "You need to go up now. It seems there was a coffee accident in the main office, and Dr. Cassian has an important meeting in the morning." Eloise nodded, gathering her cleaning supplies in silence. She no longer wore headphones since being fired from her last job for not hearing a client call out. Now she worked in the vacuum of her own thoughts. She was almost grateful for it. The absence of external sound allowed her to better hear the memories of her grandmother's voice, the whispered advice, the stories about spirits that crossed worlds to settle unfinished business. "Your soul bears ancient scars. Child," Lola would say on rainy nights like that one, lighting candles for Saints Eloise had never recognized. "You have lived before. You carry memories that are not yours." The exclusive staff elevator stopped with a metallic jolt. The doors opened to an impeccably lit corridor, decorated with contemporary artworks. Minimalist installations she had cleaned dozens of times on lower floors, but which here seemed to possess a different aura. The atmosphere was dense, as if the air carried secrets. Eloise slowly pushed her cleaning cart, noticing that the floor was completely deserted. All the offices were dark, except for a faint light at the end of the corridor, the president's office. She approached cautiously, tapping lightly on the slightly ajar door. There was no response. She pushed the heavy door open, revealing a spacious and austere environment. Exposed concrete walls, floor-to-ceiling windows with a view of the drenched city, an immense black marble desk supported by brushed steel. There were almost no personal objects, just a face-down portrait, a half-empty whiskey bottle, and scattered documents, and sitting in a leather armchair with his back to the door, an immobile male silhouette. He didn't turn when Eloise's bucket accidentally hit the wall. He didn't say a word when she cleared her throat, announcing her presence. He just remained watching the storm lash the metropolis 43 floors below. "Excuse me, may I start cleaning?" Eloise asked, instinctively keeping her eyes down. Silence. Only the sound of rain hitting the windows and an old clock ticking in some corner of the room. "Start on the left side," a deep, controlled voice finally said, not rising beyond what was strictly necessary. Eloise nodded and began to work, maintaining a respectful distance from the figure who remained motionless. There was something magnetic about that man, something that attracted and repelled with equal intensity. As she meticulously cleaned each surface, she noticed he was observing her in the reflection of the window. It wasn't a look of desire or contempt, it was a look of troubled recognition, as if searching for something familiar in a strange face. It was when she bent down to pick up fallen papers that the small handkerchief slipped from her uniform pocket. A frayed piece of fabric embroidered with the name Lola in faded red thread, her grandmother's last gift before she passed. The man suddenly stood up. Heloise froze. In 3 long strides he was before her, tall, imposing, wearing an impeccable dark suit even at that early hour of the morning. Adrian Cassian was younger than the rumors suggested, probably not past 40, but his eyes carried the weight of someone who had lived too many lives. His angular face, stubble, and an almost imperceptible scar above his right eyebrow composed a severe beauty, almost painful to behold. He bent down and picked up the handkerchief before she could reach it. His fingers brushed the fabric with a delicacy incompatible with his rigid posture. "Lola," he pronounced, as if testing the sound of the name in his own voice. "She was my grandmother," Eloise replied, fighting the urge to snatch the handkerchief from his hands. "She passed away 3 months ago." Something flashed in Adrian's eyes. Recognition, confusion, a fleeting memory. "Your name," he demanded, tucking the handkerchief into his own jacket pocket. "Eloise Silver." She reached out to take the handkerchief back, but recoiled when she saw his expression harden. "Please, it's important to me. It's the only keepsake I have of her. Be here at the same time tomorrow," he said, completely ignoring her request, turning to return to his armchair. "I will keep this safe." It wasn't a request, it was an order. And there was something more, a veiled urgency that made Eloise shiver. "I need to finish cleaning," she murmured, confused by the turn of events. "It's clean enough. You may go." Eloise gathered her materials, feeling his gaze follow her every move. As she was about to leave, his voice stopped her again. "How did she die?" The question caught her off guard. She turned slowly. "In her sleep. They say it's the death of the righteous." She hesitated before adding, "She spoke with the dead. She said I had an old soul that I had lived before. I think in the end she was crazy." Adrian Cassian did not reply, but his jaw clenched, and for an instant Eloise was certain she saw a tear forcefully held back. She left quickly, pushing the cart down the corridor, her heart pounding as if she had just escaped something dangerous. The next night, Marlene called her again. "You're permanently assigned to the 43rd floor. Direct orders from Dr. Cassian. Exclusively at midnight, exclusively alone." "Why? What happened?" Marlene shrugged, but her eyes conveyed concern. "Don't question it, girl. The man pays your salary. If he wants you to clean his floor, you clean it, and thank God for the opportunity." Eloise accepted in silence, though she felt a mixture of apprehension and curiosity. That same night at 11:58 p.m., she was in the private elevator, ascending to the same austere environment. This time Adrian Cassian was standing, staring fixedly at a wall where old documents and clippings were organized like a mind map. Hearing the cart, he turned. "Punctual," he observed, and there was a trace of approval in his voice. "You have my handkerchief," Eloise replied, unable to hold back the words. An almost imperceptible smile appeared on his lips, disappearing immediately. "Sit down." He indicated a chair in front of his desk. "I want to ask you some questions." Eloise hesitated, aware of the social chasm that separated them, the impropriety of that invitation, the risk it posed to her job. But there was something stronger that compelled her to obey, a visceral curiosity, a sense of déjà vu she couldn't explain. "I'm on duty," she argued faintly. "I am your duty now." She sat, maintaining an upright posture, hands in her lap, eyes alert. Adrian remained standing, pacing the office like a predator calculating his next move. "Your grandmother, Lola, what was her full surname?" "Dolores Almeida Silva, but everyone called her Lola." He nodded as if confirming a suspicion. "And your mother?" "She died when I was 2. I barely remember her." "Name?" "Helena Silva." Adrian abruptly stopped pacing, fixing his gaze on Eloise with an intensity that made her shrink back in her chair. "And your father?" "I never met him. My grandmother said he was an important man who couldn't acknowledge a family. I never really believed it. I think she was just trying to soften an abandonment." Adrian walked to a sideboard and poured 2 cups of tea from a tray Heloise hadn't noticed. He offered one to her, which she accepted with hesitation. "How old are you, Heloise?" 23. He took a sip of tea, his eyes never leaving hers. "Why do you work these hours? A young woman like you should be studying, building a better future. Not everyone has that privilege, Dr. Cassian, she replied with a hint of bitterness. I was studying literature at the public university, but I had to drop out when my grandmother fell ill. Now I need this job to survive. Where do you live? In a studio flat in the East End. It's what I managed to rent after the landlord raised the rent on the house where I lived with my grandmother. He nodded slowly, absorbing every detail like pieces of a puzzle. What do you see when you look at me, Eloise? The question surprised her. She raised her eyes, looking at him directly for the first time. I see a powerful man who is used to getting what he wants, she answered honestly. I see someone who carries pain but hides it under layers of control. I see someone who is afraid of something I can't identify. Adrian showed no reaction, but his eyes darkened. Interesting analysis for someone who cleans offices. Scrubbing floors doesn't make me less observant. Perhaps even more so. People rarely look at those who are bent over cleaning their dirt. We become invisible. It's a good position to see the truth. A silence settled between them, charged with unresolved tension. Adrian walked to his desk and opened a drawer. From it, he retrieved the embroidered handkerchief and held it out to her. Here, it wasn't my intention to deprive you of an important keepsake. Eloise took the handkerchief, feeling the fabric between her fingers. It was different. It had been carefully washed and pressed, the edges mended with almost invisible stitches. Thank you, she murmured, confused by the unexpected gesture. You may continue your work now, he said, resuming his distant posture. And tomorrow, be here at the same time. For weeks, the pattern repeated. Eloise went up to the 43rd floor at midnight, performed the cleaning under Adrian's watchful eye, and gradually, the conversations became longer, more personal. He never spoke about himself, only asked questions about her childhood, about Lola, about her abandoned dreams. Sometimes he offered tea, sometimes whiskey. Occasionally he asked her to read aloud documents he selected, old reports, correspondence, newspaper clippings. Rumors began to circulate in the building. The other cleaners cast suspicious glances. Marlene called her for a private conversation. What's going on up there, girl? She asked in a low voice, her eyes worried. Nothing. I just do my job. Nobody spends 4 hours cleaning an office every night. And Dr. Cassian never stayed late before you started working here. Eloise averted her gaze. He asked me to organize some old files. I suppose he trusts my discretion. Marlene squeezed her arm tightly. Be careful, Eloise. Men like him aren't interested in women like us without a reason, and it's rarely a reason that benefits us. But there was something about those nocturnal encounters that Eloise couldn't or wouldn't resist. It wasn't just Adrian's magnetic presence, or the way he treated her with a cautious respect that bordered on reverence. It was the growing feeling that there was an inexplicable connection between them, something that transcended logic, that vibrated on an almost cellular level. And then in the 5th week, everything changed. Eloise arrived promptly at midnight, but the office was empty. On the desk, an envelope with her name written in elegant calligraphy. Inside, a card with an address in Kensington and a key. On the back of the card, just one sentence. Come when your shift ends. We need to talk. The taxi dropped her off in front of an Art Deco building on Kensington High Street, one of those old buildings that breathed history and privilege. The doorman looked at her suspiciously, but when she showed him the key, he merely indicated the elevator with a nod. Apartment 1701. Eloise hesitated before using the key, aware that she was crossing an invisible boundary. The door opened to a spacious and austere apartment, decorated with contemporary design pieces that contrasted with the classicism of the building. The lights were dim, and through the panoramic windows, London pulsed in its nightly ballet of lights and shadows. I didn't think you'd come. Adrian's voice emerged from a dark corner of the room. He was sitting in a leather armchair, without his jacket, the sleeves of his white shirt rolled up to his elbows, revealing strong forearms marked by thin, parallel scars that Eloise pretended not to notice. You gave me an order, not an invitation, she replied, remaining close to the door. Why are we here and not at the office? Adrian stood up, walking to a drinks trolley. He poured 2 glasses of whiskey. Because what I have to show you cannot be in the company files. He handed her one of the glasses and walked to a bookshelf from which he retrieved an old folder. He placed it on a coffee table and gestured for Heloise to approach. "Before you open this, I need you to understand. What you will see here may change your life in ways you may not be prepared to face." Heloise took a sip of whiskey, feeling the liquid burn her throat, offering artificial courage. "What's in that folder that's so important?" "Your past. Or rather, the past that connects us." With hands that betrayed a slight tremor, Adrian opened the folder. The first thing Heloise saw was a photograph. A young, beautiful woman, with intense eyes and dark hair, smiling at the camera. It could have been herself, except for subtle differences in facial structure. "Teresa," Adrian whispered, carefully observing Heloise's reaction. "Teresa Almeida. Who is she?" "She was the love of my life. And from what I recently discovered, your biological mother." The room seemed to spin around Heloise. She clutched the edge of the table to maintain her balance. "Impossible. My mother was Helena Silva. Helena was your adoptive mother, Lola's sister. She took you in when Teresa disappeared." Heloise shook her head, refusing to believe. "Why would my grandmother lie about that?" "To protect you." "From me." A heavy silence settled between them. Adrian continued, his voice now a lower tone, almost reverent. "Teresa and I met 24 years ago. I had just graduated in business administration, starting to work at my father's company. She was a journalism student, investigating a corruption scandal involving my family. We fell in love against all odds, against all warnings." He paused, taking a long sip of whiskey. "It was a devastating love, the kind that consumes everything in its path." Eloise remained silent, absorbing every word as one who receives calculated blows. "Teresa had demons," he continued. "She struggled with severe depression, with addictions I tried to help her overcome. We had been together for almost a year when she discovered she was pregnant." Eloise's eyes widened. "Are you saying that you—" "Yes. Everything indicates that I am your biological father." "Heloise," she instinctively recoiled, knocking over the glass which shattered on the wooden floor. "No, that's sick. Why are you making up this story?" "I'm not making it up. 2 weeks ago, I found an old diary of Teresa's among my deceased father's belongings. In it, she mentions having given birth to a girl in secret who was handed over to her best friend's sister, Lola, for upbringing. The date coincides with your birth. Even if it's true, why would you care now? Why look for me after all these years?" Adrian took a step towards her, and for the first time, Heloise saw genuine vulnerability in his eyes. "Because I spent 23 years believing that Teresa had died of an overdose after losing our baby. I spent 23 years carrying the guilt of not having been able to save her, of having been indirectly responsible for 2 deaths. To discover that you exist," his voice faltered. "You don't understand what this means." Eloise felt nauseous, the room spinning around her. Fragmented images of her childhood began to rearrange themselves. Lola's silence whenever she asked about her father, the torn photographs, the hidden medicines, the whispers in the dead of night. "If you're my father, why were you watching me that way in the office?" she asked, her voice laden with accusation. "There was something in your gaze that wasn't paternal." Adrian ran a hand over his face, a gesture that revealed physical and emotional exhaustion. "When I first saw you, I didn't know who you were. I just noticed a disturbing resemblance to Teresa. The same way of moving her hands, the same concentrated gaze. It was only later, when I saw the handkerchief with Lola's name, that the pieces began to fit together. And when you found out, you kept calling me every night, watching me, asking me personal questions. That doesn't seem like the behavior of a father reuniting with a daughter. I needed to be sure before revealing something so serious. I needed to get to know you, to understand who you are, to confirm my suspicions." Eloise walked to the window, looking at the city below, feeling suddenly small and insignificant before the magnitude of that revelation. "Where is Teresa now? Is she alive?" Adrian's face hardened. "I don't know. After I believed her dead, I spent years in rehabilitation clinics fighting my own demons. When I finally resumed my life, I took over the family business and buried myself in work. It was only recently, with my father's death, that I found the diary and began to investigate." "And what do you want from me now? A DNA test? An emotional reconciliation hug?" Adrian approached, stopping a few feet from her. "I want the truth. And I believe you do too. There's something bigger at stake here, Heloise. Something I don't fully understand yet." What? Teresa didn't just disappear, she fled, and she left clues, as if she wanted to be found eventually. The diary contains coded pages, references to people and places I'm trying to decipher. And there's more. In the last few weeks, I've been receiving anonymous threats. Old photographs, newspaper clippings about my father's death. Someone knows about our past and is using it to target me. Eloise felt a shiver run down her spine. What does that have to do with me? Everything. The last threat came with a message. She's back. At first, I thought they were referring to Teresa. Now I believe they're talking about you. Somehow you are the central piece of this game. Eloise shook her head, overwhelmed with information, with contradictory emotions. This is crazy. I'm just a cleaner, a student who dropped out of college to take care of her grandmother. I'm not part of any conspiracy. Adrian took her hands in his, the first deliberate physical contact between them. His hands were warm, firm, conveying an urgency that his words couldn't fully express. You are much more than that, Eloise. You are Teresa's daughter, my daughter. And someone out there knows it and considers that information dangerous enough to use as a weapon. At that moment, Adrian's cell phone vibrated. He checked it quickly and his face paled. What is it? Eloise asked, alarmed by the change in his expression. He turned the screen so she could see a text message from an unknown number containing a photograph. In the image, Eloise was standing in front of the building where they lived, less than an hour ago. And below a message like father, like daughter, both drawn to the same abyss. Eloise felt her blood run cold. And I'm being followed? Adrian quickly put away his phone. It's not safe for you to go home tonight. You can stay in the guest room. I'm not staying here, she protested, taking a step back. I don't know you. I don't trust you. I'm not asking you to trust me. I'm asking you to be prudent. Someone is watching us, Eloise. Someone who knows our past and is preparing some kind of revenge. Until we understand what's happening, we need to stay together. Eloise hesitated, torn between the fear of the unknown outside and the whirlwind of contradictory emotions Adrian's presence provoked. One night, she finally agreed. Tomorrow I'll find my own answers. Adrian nodded, respecting her decision. The guest room is over there. There are clothes in the wardrobe that should fit. They were Teresa's, Eloise completed, feeling a strange familiarity with that name that should have been strange, but which echoed in her memory like a forgotten song. When Adrian left her alone in the spacious and impersonal room, Eloise allowed herself to collapse onto the king-size bed, her body trembling with the weight of the revelations. Through the window, the rain was falling again over London, and she suddenly remembered a recurring dream. She was always looking for something important in an old house, while the rain lashed the roof. In the dream, there was always a woman crying, calling a name Eloise could never distinguish. Now, lying in that strange bed, in the apartment of the man who claimed to be her father, the man for whom she had felt an inexplicable and disturbing attraction, Eloise finally understood. The woman in the dream was Teresa, and she was crying for the child she believed she had lost. In the early hours, unable to sleep, Eloise opened the wardrobe and found carefully preserved women's clothes, dresses, blouses, trousers that seemed frozen in time, in the style of the 90s. With trembling fingers, she touched the fabrics, feeling a physical connection to the woman who had given birth to her. At the bottom of the wardrobe, she discovered a shoebox. Inside, old photographs. Teresa and Adrian together, much younger, smiling in love. Teresa with friends on a beach. Teresa alone with a distant gaze, a hand over her slightly rounded belly. And a last photo. Teresa hugging a woman Eloise immediately recognized, Lola, her grandmother, much younger, both smiling at the camera in front of an old mansion that looked eerily familiar. It was the house from her dreams. The house where, in her subconscious, she was always looking for something lost. She turned the photograph over and found an inscription, Teresa and Lola, House of Mirrors, 1997. Below, in a different handwriting, an address in the Shoreditch district in central London. Eloise put the photograph in her pocket. She had found her first destination in the search for answers. And she would need to go alone, without Adrian, the man who said he was her father, but whose eyes conveyed something more complex and disturbing than paternal love. On the other side of the wall, Adrian remained awake, staring fixedly at a portrait of Teresa he had kept hidden for years. He whispered to the image as he had done hundreds of times before. "She's back, Teresa. Our daughter is back. And with her all the ghosts we tried to bury." A lightning bolt cut across the London sky, briefly illuminating the room where Eloise finally fell asleep, dreaming of mirrors that reflected faces that were not hers, of voices whispering secrets buried for 2 decades, of a love that transcended time and lies, a love as deep and obscure as the abyss that now opened beneath her feet. The rain continued to fall, relentless, washing the city but not the secrets that pulsed in its dark heart, awaiting the right moment to emerge to the surface. The sun had not yet risen when Heloise left Adrian's apartment. She put on one of the clothes found in the wardrobe, a simple, light fabric dress that fit her body as if it had been made for her, and left silently, leaving only a note on the unmade bed. "I need to find my own answers." In the taxi, she watched the city slowly awaken. London had this gift. Even wounded, even exhausted, it was reborn every day with an almost touching stubbornness. Just as she herself had been doing for as long as she could remember. The address found in the photograph led her to a narrow street in Shoreditch, where old townhouses bravely resisted real estate speculation. She paid the driver and stood before number 278, a faded Art Deco townhouse, with tall windows protected by ornate grilles and a discreet sign announcing House of Mirrors, Antiques and Esoteric Articles. The place was closed at that hour of the morning, but Heloise felt a visceral recognition. She knew that door, those worn marble stairs, the feeling of standing before a portal to another time, not from conscious memories but from somewhere deeper, as if her body recognized the path before her mind could name the experience. She sat on the front steps, hugging her knees, waiting. At 8 o'clock, she heard footsteps approaching from inside the house. The door opened, revealing a middle-aged black woman with white hair tied in an elegant bun, colorful framed glasses, and a shawl of vibrant patterns. "We're closed until 10, the woman said automatically, without really looking at Heloise. "I'm looking for information about Teresa Almeida," Heloise replied, standing up. "And about Lola Silva." The woman stood motionless, her hand still on the doorknob. When she finally raised her eyes to look at Heloise, her expression transformed into absolute shock. "Good heavens," she murmured, bringing a hand to her chest. "Teresa?" "No, I'm Heloise. Teresa's daughter." The woman opened the door wider, her eyes now examining every detail of Heloise's face with a mixture of disbelief and recognition. "Come in," she finally said, her voice now an urgent whisper. "Quickly before anyone sees you." The interior of the shop was exactly as Heloise had imagined in her dreams, walls covered with old mirrors of all sizes and shapes, shelves filled with mystical objects, crystals, dried herbs in glass jars, tarot cards, statues of Catholic saints mixed with orishas. The air was dense with the smell of incense and old books. The woman locked the door again and turned to Heloise, still with a stunned expression. "My name is Jurema Nascimento. I was a friend of your mother, and of Lola." She guided Heloise to the back of the shop, through a bead curtain to a small room that served as an office and makeshift kitchen. She indicated a chair and began to prepare coffee in silence, her hands trembling slightly. "How did you find me?" she finally asked, as she served 2 cups of strong coffee. Eloise took the photograph from her pocket and placed it on the table. "I found this among the things Adrian Cassian kept of my mother." Jurema picked up the photo carefully, as if it were a sacred artifact. "This photo was taken right here in this shop. It was 1997. Her voice faltered. "Teresa was 5 months pregnant. With you. So it's true. Teresa was my biological mother." Jurema nodded slowly. "And Adrian Cassian is your father, although he didn't know it at the time. Teresa hid the pregnancy from him for months, and when she finally told him..." She paused, her eyes lost in painful memories. "Let's just say it was the beginning of the end." Eloise took a sip of the bitter coffee, trying to organize the questions that accumulated in her mind. "Why did my grandmother lie to me? Why did she say my mother was Helena? To protect you. From Adrian, from the Cassian family, and especially from yourself." "From myself? What does that mean?" Jurema sighed deeply, adjusting her glasses. "Teresa was not an ordinary woman, Eloise. She had gifts, sensitivities that went beyond the normal. Just like Lola, just like you, I imagine. Are you talking about mediumship? About speaking with the dead? I'm talking about seeing beyond, about remembering other lives, about carrying memories that don't belong only to this existence. Jurema hesitated before continuing. Teresa believed that her soul and Adrian's were trapped in a cycle of encounters and losses that repeated through the centuries. A love as deep as it was destructive. Eloise felt a shiver run down her spine. That's crazy. Perhaps. Or perhaps it's just an explanation that doesn't fit the small logic of this world. Jurema took a sip of coffee. The fact is that Teresa discovered things about the Cassian family, buried secrets that put both her and you in danger. That's when she decided to disappear. Is she alive? Jurema averted her gaze. I don't know. No one saw her again after that night. What night? The night Adrian's father, Augustus Cassian, appeared in this shop with 2 henchmen, demanding to know where Teresa was hiding. They turned everything upside down, broke mirrors, threatened to set the place on fire. Lola was here with me. That's when we decided you needed to disappear too. Lola took you to the outskirts, changed your surname, created the story that you were Helena's daughter, who had passed away. Eloise stood up, unable to contain her growing agitation. What were these secrets? What did Teresa discover about the Cassians? Jurema looked around, as if fearing to be overheard even though she was alone with Heloise. Teresa was an investigative journalist. She was looking into allegations of money laundering involving politicians and big businessmen. Cassian and Roman was one of the targets. But what she discovered went far beyond financial corruption. Jurema lowered her voice even further. There were rumors about rituals, obscure practices that London's elite performed in an isolated house in the Chiltern Hills. Sacrifices. Human sacrifices. That sounds like a cheap movie plot. I don't know exactly what happened there. Teresa never told me all the details. I only know that she was terrified when she discovered that Augustus Cassian was one of the leaders of these meetings, and that Adrian, no matter how much she loved him, was being prepared to take his father's place. Eloise shook her head, trying to process information that seemed to come from a delirious nightmare. And you believed that? Without proof. Teresa had proof. Photographs, recordings, documents, all stored on a USB drive she hid in a place only she knew. Jurema stood up and walked to an old cabinet. From it she took out a carved wooden box. And she left this with me to give to you when you turn 25. Eloise took the box with trembling hands. It was heavy, crafted from dark wood with metal details. A complicated lock kept its contents safe. What's the key? It's not a common key. It's a combination of letters. Teresa said that when the time came, you would know. Eloise looked at the lock. It had a circular mechanism with engraved letters that could be rotated to form words. How can I know? I never knew my mother. You did know her. Perhaps not in this life, not with this consciousness. But your soul knows. Jurema pointed to the photograph on the table. Look closely at her, Heloise. Look into Teresa's eyes. Eloise fixed her gaze on her mother's image. Teresa looked directly at the camera, her eyes intense and deep, with an expression that mixed determination and melancholy. There was something in that gaze that echoed within Heloise, awakening fragments of memories, sensations, words whispered in dreams. Without thinking, her fingers began to move the lock's discs. L-O-L-A. It didn't work. She tried again. T-H-E-R-E, nothing. She took a deep breath, closing her eyes, letting a deep intuition guide her movements, Zoul. A soft click, and the box opened. Inside, she found an old USB drive, letters yellowed with time, photographs, and a small red leather-bound diary. She picked up the diary first, opening it carefully. On the first page, a dedication, "To my daughter when it's time to remember. Some souls are trapped in cycles that need to be broken so they can finally find peace. Our time together was brief, but our bond is eternal. Now it's up to you to finish what I started." With infinite love, Teresa. Silent tears streamed down Heloise's face. She knew she wouldn't come back, she whispered. Jurema nodded sadly. Teresa had visions. Sometimes she could see fragments of the future. In the last few weeks before she disappeared, she would wake up screaming in the middle of the night, talking about blood, broken mirrors, a man drowned in guilt. She paused before adding, and about a girl who would grow up to rewrite the end of the story. Heloise quickly leafed through the diary. Besides personal notes, there were pages of journalistic research, names, dates, locations, connections between powerful people in London. On the last pages, she found a detailed map of a property in the Chiltern Hills, with specific markings and coded instructions. "I need to leave," she said suddenly, putting everything back in the box. "It's not safe for you if I stay here." "Where are you going?" "I don't know yet, but I need to find out what happened to Teresa. If she's alive or—" She was interrupted by the insistent ring of her cell phone. The number was unknown. "Hello? Where are you?" Adrian's voice sounded tense, forcefully controlled. "How did you get my number?" "So how does it matter? Someone broke into my apartment this morning. They ransacked everything, especially the room where you slept." Eloise felt her blood run cold. "What were they looking for?" "I'm not sure. But they left a message for you. Ask Jurema about the House of Mirrors." Eloise looked at Jurema, who was watching her with apprehension. "I have to hang up." "No. Wait, we're not safe apart. Tell me where you are, I'll come get you." "Why? To protect me or to use me as bait?" A heavy silence on the other end of the line. "What are you talking about?" "I know about the rituals in the Chiltern Hills. I know what your family did. What you probably still do." Another silence, longer. "I have no idea what you're talking about, but if someone told you that, they're trying to separate us." "Eloise, listen. There are things about my family you need to know, but it's not what you're thinking. My father," his voice faltered. "Augustus was a complex man with secrets, yes, but not what you imagine." "Then what?" "Maid, I can't explain it over the phone. Please meet me in a public place if you prefer." "You choose." Eloise hesitated, torn between distrust and an inexplicable certainty that she needed to hear what Adrian had to say. "The British Museum. In an hour." "At the main entrance, I'll be there." She hung up and turned to Jurema, who was staring at her with a grave expression. "You're going to meet him?" "Yes, I need to find out the truth." "Be careful, child. If Adrian is like his father—" "Maybe he isn't." Eloise put away her phone. "Jurema, you said Teresa believed in past lives, in souls meeting repeatedly. Have you ever felt that? That certainty of having lived something before?" The woman smiled sadly. "Every day. That's why I have this shop. The mirrors. They don't just reflect who we are now, but echoes of who we once were. Some people can see." Eloise suddenly remembered the strange feeling she had felt when she first saw Adrian, that visceral recognition, the inexplicable familiarity, the fear mixed with an attraction that defied logic. If my mother were alive, where would she hide? Jurema reflected for a moment. There's a place, an old house on the coast of Cornwall. It belonged to Teresa's family, before they lost everything. She always said that if she ever needed to disappear off the map, she would go there. "Do you have the address?" "No, but I know how to get there. It's an isolated house at the end of a dirt road, surrounded by ancient woodland." Jurema wrote down directions on a piece of paper. "But Eloise, if Teresa is alive and has been hiding all this time, there must be a very strong reason." "I know. And I intend to find out what it is." Before leaving, Eloise paused before an old oval mirror with an ornate silver frame. Her reflection seemed different, as if another person was looking through her eyes. "This mirror," she murmured. "It was Teresa's favorite," Jurema confirmed. "She said it was a portal, that it showed not only the present but fragments of the past and future. That through it, she could see the lives she had already lived, the loves she had already lost." Eloise touched the cold surface of the mirror with her fingertips. "Does it show the truth?" "It depends on who looks, and what they are prepared to see." The British Museum was teeming with tourists when Eloise arrived. She had chosen the location deliberately, an open, public, historical space, a place where she would feel safe enough to confront Adrian with her discoveries. She spotted him from afar, standing at the top of the monumental staircase. Even dressed casually, dark jeans, white shirt, grey blazer, Adrian exuded an aura of authority that made people instinctively step aside, making way without realizing it. When their eyes met, Eloise felt that disturbing connection again, that sense of recognition that transcended logic, as if every cell in her body vibrated at a frequency that responded to his. "You came," he said, as she approached. "You too." An uncomfortable silence settled between them, charged with unformulated questions. contained accusations, an unconfessable desire they both struggled to repress. "Shall we go in?" Adrian suggested, indicating the museum doors. "We can talk as we walk." Eloise nodded, and they bought tickets, mingling with the crowd circulating through the historical halls. The exhibition on the history of Britain served as a perfect backdrop for a conversation about past, present, and the weight of history. "I know what you must be thinking," Adrian began, keeping his voice low. "That I'm just like my father. That I participate in some kind of obscure sect or cult. And you don't?" He looked at her intently. "No, I never did. It was precisely because I refused to follow Augustus's footsteps that I was sent to a clinic in Switzerland. Treatment for depression was what they officially said. In reality, it was a way to remove me, to silence me." "Silence about what?" Adrian looked around, making sure no one was listening. "My father and some business associates and politicians formed a group that called themselves the Guardians. They met monthly at a house in the Chiltern Hills for rituals that mixed elements from various esoteric traditions." He paused, carefully choosing his words. "They weren't human sacrifices, as some rumors suggest, but there were questionable practices, use of hallucinogenic substances, rituals of psychological domination, manipulation of vulnerable people." "And you found out?" "Not only did I find out, I tried to expose them. That's when I met Teresa. She was a journalist, investigating allegations of money laundering involving Cassian and Roman. We started exchanging information." "And that you fell in love?" Adrian nodded, a sad smile briefly appearing on his lips. "It was overwhelming, as if we had known each other for centuries, as if every moment together was simultaneously new and familiar." They stopped before a historical painting depicting a royal family. Adrian continued, his voice now almost a whisper. "Teresa was different. She saw things others didn't see. She had premonitory dreams, inexplicable sensations. At first I thought it was just an eccentric trait. But over time I realized there was something more. She believed that he hesitated, that our souls had met before," Eloise completed. "In other lives." Adrian looked at her, surprised. "How do you know that?" "Jurema told me. And I found Teresa's diary." He paled. "So you know about the USB drive with the evidence?" "Yes, but I haven't had time to check its contents yet." Adrian seemed genuinely relieved. "Teresa gathered evidence against my father and his associates. Proof of corruption, blackmail, manipulation of the financial market. But the most serious were the records of the rituals, the names of the people involved. High-ranking politicians, judges, businessmen. Enough to bring down some of London's most powerful families. Why are you telling me this? Because I need you to understand the real danger we face. These aren't just ghosts or paranormal conspiracies. These are flesh and blood people with power and influence, willing to do anything to protect their secrets." He ran a hand through his hair, a gesture of frustration. "After Teresa disappeared, I spent years fighting my own demons. When I finally took control of the company, after my father's death, I slowly began to dismantle his schemes, to cut ties with that group, to redirect the business towards legitimate investments. And now someone is threatening to expose everything? Or not just expose, avenge themselves, using you as the central piece." They walked to a less crowded wing of the museum where they could talk more privately. "I believe Teresa is alive," Adrian said, looking at her directly, "and that she has finally decided to settle scores." Eloise felt her heart quicken. "Do you think she's the one following us? Threatening us? Or someone acting under her orders? The messages, the clues, everything seems part of an elaborate game to draw us somewhere. To a final confrontation. But why now, after all these years?" Adrian took a deep breath. "Because I'm finally in a position of power to confront my father's legacy. Because you're old enough to understand the truth. And because," he hesitated, "because the cycles need to be broken. That's what Teresa always said." Eloise felt a shiver run down her spine. "What cycles?" "According to Teresa's theories, our souls are trapped in a pattern that repeats through time. We always meet, we always fall in love, and it always ends in tragedy. A death, a forced separation, a sacrifice." Adrian lowered his voice even further. "She believed that at some point in the past, we made an oath that condemned us to this eternal cycle, and that we could only break it if we faced the original fear together." "That's crazy," Eloise murmured, but her heart was pounding. That's what I thought for a long time, until I started dreaming about you, years before we met. I dreamed of a woman who looked like Teresa, but wasn't her. A woman who called me by a name that was never mine. Eloise stopped abruptly. What name? Adrian looked at her, his eyes reflecting a mixture of confusion and absolute certainty. Augustus, the same name as my father. The world seemed to compress around Eloise. Fragmented images flooded her mind. A man with Adrian's face, dressed in clothes from another era, calling her by another name. A broken mirror. Blood on her hands. A whispered promise as life drained away. We need to find Teresa, she said, her voice trembling. Jurema told me about a house in Cornwall, a place where Teresa would go if she needed to disappear. Adrian nodded. I know that place. Teresa took me there once at the beginning of our relationship. A house by the sea, isolated, surrounded by ancient woodland. Let's go today. It's dangerous. Whoever is watching us, we have no choice. If Teresa is alive, if she has answers, we need to find her before it's too late. When they left the museum, the London sky was again laden with dark clouds. Adrian led Eloise to his car, a black Audi parked nearby. I'll get a few things from my apartment and then we'll leave for Cornwall. The journey takes about 3 hours. Eloise hesitated before getting into the vehicle. How can I trust you? Adrian looked at her with an intensity that made her heart skip a beat. You can't. Just as I can't fully trust you. We are both walking in the dark, Eloise. The only certainty I have is that our destinies are intertwined in a way that transcends this moment, this life. Something in the raw sincerity of those words touched Eloise deeply. She got into the car, feeling that she was crossing another invisible boundary, approaching a point of no return. At Adrian's apartment, while he gathered documents and clothes for the trip, Eloise re-examined the contents of Teresa's box. The USB drive seemed too old to be compatible with current computers. The letters were encoded in a language she couldn't decipher. The diary contained torn pages, creating gaps in the narrative. It was then that she found hidden between the pages of the diary an old key. Small bronze with a peculiar design at the top, a sun intertwined with a crescent moon. Ready? Adrian appeared at the bedroom door, a backpack on his back. Yes, Eloise replied, quickly hiding the key in her pocket. For some reason she couldn't explain, she felt she should keep that discovery a secret, at least for now. The rain fell heavily as they left London, heading down the A303 motorway towards the south coast. Adrian drove intently, occasionally checking the rearview mirror. Do you think we're being followed? Eloise asked, noticing his behavior. I don't know. But it would be naive to think they're not watching our movements. The silence that followed was not uncomfortable. There was a strange intimacy between them, as if the revelations of the past 24 hours had created a connection that went beyond words. If you are my father, Eloise began hesitantly. Why do I feel... She couldn't complete the sentence. Adrian looked at her quickly before returning his attention to the slippery road. Why do you feel this attraction? This connection that shouldn't exist? She nodded, embarrassed. I don't know if I'm really your biological father, Eloise. His voice was calm but laden with contained emotion. That's what it seems, given the circumstances, the dates, what Teresa wrote. But we never did a DNA test. And considering everything we've discovered about cycles of past lives, about souls meeting repeatedly, perhaps the connections are more complex than our earthly labels can define. You feel it too, don't you? She dared to ask. This thing between us. Adrian gripped the steering wheel tightly, his knuckles whitening. From the first moment I saw you, and I fought against it with all my might, believing it was perverse, sick, that it was just the resemblance to Teresa confusing me. He took a deep breath. But perhaps it's something older, deeper. Something that needs to be faced to break the cycle, Eloise concluded, feeling a chill that was not from fear. Perhaps. The rain gradually diminished as they descended the hills towards Cornwall. The sea appeared in the distance, a dark mantle under the still-laden sky. Adrian followed Eloise's directions, turning onto secondary roads that became increasingly narrow and precarious. Finally, they reached a dirt road that led to an isolated beach. At the end of the path, partially hidden by dense vegetation, stood a simple two-story house painted faded blue with a veranda facing the sea. They parked at a distance, observing the property. There were no signs of movement, no visible lights, no car. "It looks abandoned," Heloisa commented. "Or carefully preserved to look abandoned," Adrian countered. They approached cautiously. The house had an air of dignified solitude, like an old lady maintaining her posture even in poverty. The windows were boarded up with wooden planks, the paint peeled in several places, but the structure remained solid. The main door was locked naturally. Adrian examined the windows, looking for a way to enter while Heloise circled the house, observing details, letting intuition guide her. It was then that she noticed, almost hidden by the vegetation, a smaller side door, and above the doorknob, a symbol carved into the wood, a sun intertwined with a crescent moon. Instinctively, Eloise reached into her pocket, where she had kept the key found in Teresa's diary. It fit perfectly. The door opened with a prolonged groan of rusty hinges. Adrian appeared beside her, surprised. "How? It was in the diary," she replied simply, stepping into the house's gloom. The interior was surprisingly well preserved, as if someone made periodic maintenance visits. The furniture was covered with white sheets, protected from dust. The wooden floor, though worn, was clean. The walls held framed photographs, images of Teresa's family, Heloise supposed. Adrian walked to one of them, wiping a thin layer of dust with his fingertips. "It's her," he murmured. "Younger than when I met her. Must be from her university days." Heloise approached, observing the image of a smiling Teresa, no older than 20, hugging a friend in front of a university building. "She looks happy." She was, before she met me, before she discovered my family's secrets. There was bitterness in Adrian's voice. Before our love dragged her into the abyss. They continued exploring the house silently. The living room, the kitchen, a small office. In each room, the same sense of suspended time, as if the place awaited the return of its inhabitants. In the office, an old desk dominated the space. On it, a closed laptop plugged into an outlet. Too recent to belong to the time Teresa had disappeared. Adrian opened the computer. It turned on immediately without a password. On the screen, a single text file named "For When You Arrive." He clicked to open it. A simple message. "Adrian and Heloise, if you are reading this, you have finally found the way. The cycle can be broken, but only through absolute truth. Not the truth of facts, which is transient, but the truth of the soul, which is eternal. Go to the attic. There you will find the mirror. Look together, holding hands. See what needs to be seen. Remember what needs to be remembered. I will be waiting where it all began, and where it all must end. Teresa." Adrian and Heloise exchanged troubled glances. "She knew we would come," Heloise whispered. "She always knew," Adrian replied, closing the laptop. They found the stairs to the attic, hidden behind a discreet door in the back of the house. The steps creaked beneath their feet, as if protesting the intrusion. The attic was spacious, lit only by the diffused light entering through a small circular window. Stacked boxes covered old furniture, the smell of aged wood and sea air, and in the center of the space, like an improvised altar, a full-length oval mirror with an ornate silver frame, identical to Teresa's favorite mirror in the House of Mirrors, but larger, more imposing. They approached cautiously, as if the object could come to life at any moment. Their reflections appeared distorted on the ancient surface, their features blurred, as if other faces tried to emerge through theirs. "Look together, holding hands," Eloise quoted, extending her hand to Adrian. He hesitated only an instant before intertwining his fingers with hers. The physical contact sent an electric current through both their bodies. Something primitive, ancestral, a recognition that went beyond the flesh. They stood side by side before the mirror, hands clasped, hearts racing. At first nothing happened, just the blurred reflection of two bodies tense with anticipation. And then, slowly, the surface of the mirror began to ripple, like water disturbed by a stone. The reflected images, distorted, fragmented, reassembled into new forms. They were no longer Adrian and Eloise of the 21st century, but other versions of themselves in other eras, other places. A couple in revolutionary France, a priestess and a warrior in ancient Egypt, a samurai and the wife of a feudal lord in medieval Japan, a Portuguese nobleman and an indigenous slave in colonial Brazil. Dozens, hundreds of encounters across millennia, each ending in tragedy, in death, in painful separation. And always the same pattern, the irresistible attraction, the forbidden passion, the terrible price paid for defying the conventions of each era. And always the same oath repeated at the moment of death: I will find you again, in another life, in all possible futures. The visions accelerated, becoming a whirlwind of images, emotions, sensations that passed through them like waves of pure knowledge. They were not just spectators. They were experiencing each life, each love, each loss. The accumulated pain of hundreds of existences weighed upon them, almost unbearable in its intensity. And then, as quickly as it began, it all ceased. The mirror returned to showing only their current reflections, but something had changed. Their eyes now carried the weight of comprehension, of recovered memory. They released hands simultaneously, moving away from each other as if physical contact had become intolerable. Now I understand, Adrian murmured, his voice choked. The cycle. The curse. We were condemned to meet and lose each other repeatedly, Heloise completed, silent tears streaming down her face, because of the oath. An oath made with blood, with death. Adrian ran a hand over his face as if trying to erase the visions still dancing in his mind. And Teresa knew. Somehow she always knew. She was the guardian, Heloise said suddenly, a certainty emerging from the depths of her consciousness. In each life there is someone who knows the truth, who tries to help us break the cycle. This time it was her. And where is she now? The answer came in the form of a shared intuition, a simultaneous understanding. Where it all began, they quoted together. Their gazes met, a silent communication that transcended words. The Chiltern Hills, Adrian said. The house of rituals. Where the current cycle was sealed, Heloise agreed. Where your father and his associates performed the rituals. It wasn't just corruption or power games, Adrian understood. It was something older. They knew about the cycle. About us, and they tried to use it, to control it. Heloise felt a chill, as happened in other lives. They descended the stairs quickly, a new urgency guiding their steps. If Teresa was in the Chiltern Hills house, if that's where it all must end, they needed to get there as soon as possible. It was already night when they left the Cornwall house. The rain had returned, now a furious storm that turned the roads into slippery traps. Adrian drove intently, his eyes fixed on the path illuminated by the headlights. Heloise remained silent, absorbing the revelations, trying to reconcile the memories of past lives with her current identity. She was no longer sure who she was, the orphaned cleaner raised by an eccentric grandmother, or the ancient soul trapped in a cycle of love and tragedy. And there was Teresa, her biological mother, the guardian of the cycle, the woman who had abandoned everything, including her own daughter, to protect her from a destiny that seemed inevitable. What do you think she wants? She finally asked, breaking the dense silence. Adrian did not avert his eyes from the road. To break the cycle. To finish what began 24 years ago. How? I don't know. But I think we'll find out soon. The return journey to London seemed to last an eternity. The storm worsened, forcing them to slow down. Occasionally, Adrian checked the rearview mirror, the tension evident in his posture. Are we being followed? Heloise asked after observing him do this for the third time. I'm not sure. There's a car that seems to maintain the same distance. She turned to look, but could only distinguish diffuse lights through the curtain of rain. Who would it be? Whoever is helping Teresa, or trying to prevent us from reaching her. They plunged back into silence, each lost in their own thoughts, in the weight of newly recovered memories. When they finally entered the greater London area, the storm had diminished to a steady rain. Adrian took the northern direction, heading towards the Chiltern Hills. Do you know the way? Heloise asked. I was taken there a few times as a teenager. My father wanted to initiate me into the family traditions. There was bitterness in his voice. Resisting was my first act of rebellion. As they approached the hills, the roads became narrower, less illuminated. Houses and businesses gave way to isolated properties, country estates, areas of preserved woodland. Adrian finally turned onto a dirt road that snaked up the mountain. Are you taking this ancient soul story seriously? Heloise asked abruptly. Of past lives? Adrian looked at her briefly. After what we saw in the mirror. Yes, and you? I'm still processing. It seems crazy, but I feel it's true. That it explains many things. She hesitated before continuing, like what I feel when we're together. Adrian gripped the steering wheel tightly. It's easier when we think we're not really father and daughter in this life. Are we? Biologically. Perhaps, probably. But our souls? That's another story. After 20 minutes climbing increasingly precarious roads, they reached a clearing. In the center, a neoclassical mansion stood, imposing even in its evident abandonment. Broken windows, ivy partially covering the walls, the garden transformed into a disordered jungle. The Cassian house, Adrian announced, parking at a safe distance, built by my great-grandfather in the early 20th century. The scene of opulent parties, obscure dealings, and eventually, rituals. They remained in the car for a few minutes, observing the property. There were no visible lights, no sign of movement. Only the sound of the rain and, in the distance, the occasional rumble of thunder. "She's here," Eloise stated with inexplicable certainty. "How do you know?" "I feel it." As if part of me is already inside, waiting. They got out of the car, the fine rain immediately soaking their hair and clothes. They walked side by side down the driveway leading to the main entrance, aware that they were crossing another invisible boundary, approaching the moment of truth Teresa had promised. The massive carved wooden door was unlocked. It opened without resistance, revealing a spacious hall lit only by the diffused light entering through the tall windows. The interior smelled of mold, dampness, abandonment, but there was another odor in the air, recent incense, candle wax. "Someone has been here recently," Adrian observed, tense. "Or still is." They advanced cautiously, their footsteps echoing on the marble floor. The house was a labyrinth of interconnected rooms, winding corridors, imposing staircases, leading to upper floors. On the walls, old portraits of the Cassian family watched with severe eyes the passage of the intruders. "This way," Adrian indicated, leading her to a door at the end of a corridor. They descended a spiral staircase, entering the mansion's cellars. The air became heavier, laden with history, with secrets, and then they reached a circular hall, excavated into the mountain's rock itself. In the center, a stone altar. On the walls, engraved esoteric symbols, mirrors strategically positioned to reflect light in a specific way, and around chairs arranged in a circle, as if for a council meeting. "The Chamber of Guardians," Adrian murmured, "where my father and his associates performed the rituals." "Adrian." The female voice emerged from the shadows, making them turn quickly. A figure emerged from the gloom, a middle-aged woman with short grey hair, her face still beautiful despite the marks of time and worries. She was dressed simply in jeans and a light blouse. "Teresa," Adrian whispered, his voice choked. She smiled sadly, her eyes fixed not on him, but on Heloise, my daughter, she said softly. Finally, Heloise felt her legs weaken. In her dreams, in her fragmented memories, she had imagined this encounter hundreds of times. The reality was simultaneously simpler and more overwhelming than any fantasy. Why? It was all she could ask, a word that contained all the doubts, all the accusations, all the pain of a life of absence. Teresa approached slowly, her eyes bright with contained tears. "To protect you, to give you a chance to break the cycle." "What cycle?" Adrian intervened, his voice tense. "What is really happening, Teresa?" She averted her gaze to him, and a shadow of ancient pain crossed her face. "The cycle that has bound us for millennia, Adrian. The curse that condemns us to meet, love, and lose each other repeatedly, through the ages." "Why?" Heloise insisted. "Why does this happen?" Teresa walked to the central altar, running her hand over the cold stone, as if caressing an old acquaintance. 3,000 years ago, in a land we now call Egypt, a priestess and a warrior fell deeply in love. It was a forbidden love. She consecrated to the gods, he promised to another. When they were discovered, he killed her to spare her public humiliation, and then took his own life, first making a blood oath, that they would meet in all future lives, that their love would transcend death. "We," Adrian murmured. "It was us." Teresa nodded. "The gods granted the request, but as punishment for their arrogance, condemned their souls to always meet in impossible circumstances, to always love each other against all odds, and to always lose each other tragically." "How do you know this?" Heloise asked. "Because in each cycle there is a guardian, Someone who knows the truth, who carries the memory, who tries to help the imprisoned souls break the curse. Teresa paused significantly. In this cycle, it's me. Adrian took a step forward, confusion evident on his face. But you and I, we loved each other. Yes, Teresa smiled sadly. Part of the pattern. The guardian always falls in love with one of the imprisoned souls. That's how they gain trust, how they get close enough to try to help. So you never truly loved me? Adrian's voice trembled. I loved you, Adrian, more than you can imagine. But I knew it wasn't our destiny to be together. My role was different. To bear Eloise, he concluded. Teresa shook her head. Not just to bear, to protect, to prepare, to ensure she reached the right moment with the necessary tools to break the cycle. Eloise felt a wave of anger grow in her chest. So you abandoned me to protect me. You let me be raised by Lola, believing I was Helena's daughter. It was the only way. Teresa's voice trembled. When I discovered the truth about Adrian's family, about the rituals, about what Augustus Cassian truly was, I realized you would be in mortal danger if you stayed with me. What was my father? Adrian asked, tense. Teresa took a deep breath before answering. A corrupted guardian, someone who discovered the truth about the cycle, about the imprisoned souls, and decided to use that knowledge to gain power. The rituals he and his associates performed were not just power games or depravity. They were attempts to manipulate ancient energies, to control the cycle instead of breaking it. Why? Eloise asked. Because the cycle generates power, energy. The accumulated pain of thousands of years, of hundreds of tragic lives, creates a force that can be channeled. How utilized? Teresa looked at both of them intently. And when the cycle is broken, that energy is released. Whoever controls that release gains unimaginable power. That's why they wanted to keep us trapped in the cycle, Adrian understood. That's why my father tried to drive me away when he found out about Teresa. And that's why he tried to eliminate Heloise when he learned of your existence, Teresa completed. A child born of the two imprisoned souls was a variable he couldn't control. Heloise felt the world spin around her. It was too much to absorb. Past lives, ancient curses, guardians, mystical energy. How do we break the cycle? She finally asked, clinging to the only practical question amidst the metaphysical chaos. Teresa walked to one of the mirrors on the wall, touching its surface with her fingertips, by facing the original fear, by completing what was interrupted 3,000 years ago. And what is that? Gatul Caesar, total surrender, absolute vulnerability, love that transcends all barriers including identity. Adrian and Eloise exchanged troubled glances. Are you suggesting that? Adrian couldn't complete the question. I'm not suggesting anything physical. Teresa smiled with understanding. I'm talking about something deeper, about recognizing that you are not two but one. That separation is illusory, that the cycle continues because you insist on maintaining the division, on defining yourselves by the temporary roles you occupy in each life. How do we do that? Heloise asked, feeling simultaneously confused and enlightened, as if part of her had always known the answer. Teresa walked to a side table where an object covered by a black velvet cloth rested. She removed the fabric, revealing an ancient silver goblet, ornamented with symbols that seemed to vibrate under the diffused light. The chalice of memory, she announced. Used in all the Guardian's rituals, corrupted or not. Whoever drinks from it accesses collective memory, consciousness that transcends time and space. What does it contain? Adrian asked, approaching cautiously. Only rainwater, but consecrated by ancient words, energized by the power of this place. Teresa raised the chalice. Drink together, share the same water. Allow your consciousnesses to merge momentarily. Recognize that you are facets of the same essence. Eloise hesitated, a final doubt lingering. What if it doesn't work? What if the cycle continues? Teresa looked at her with eyes that seemed to pierce through time. Then we will meet again in another life, and we will try once more, as we have done for millennia. A heavy silence fell over the hall. Adrian and Heloise looked at each other, a silent communication flowing between them. They were no longer strangers. They were no longer biological father and daughter. They were ancient souls, knowing each other across time, carrying memories of loves and losses, that transcended their current existence. Teresa extended the chalice. The choice is yours. It always has been. Eloise was the first to reach for the chalice. Something within her, something older than her 23 years, deeper than her conscious memories, recognized the truth in Teresa's words. Adrian hesitated only an instant, before placing his hands over hers, both holding the ritual object. The water inside the chalice seemed ordinary, but when the light from occasional lightning flashes penetrated the high windows of the underground chamber, tiny reflections danced on its surface, as if entire constellations were contained within that small volume. "Drink together," Teresa instructed, her voice now carrying an ancestral authority. "Share the same water, the same breath, the same moment of consciousness. Recognize yourselves beyond the temporary roles you have assumed in this life." Eloise brought the chalice to her lips first, allowing only a few drops to touch her tongue. Adrian did the same, his eyes never leaving hers. The liquid was surprisingly sweet, with a faint metallic taste that resembled blood. Or perhaps it was just her imagination, fueled by stories of sacrifices and ancient oaths. For a few instants, nothing happened. The hall remained silent, except for the distant drumming of rain and the occasional rumble of thunder. And then, like a wave breaking against rocks, came the impact. It was not a vision like the mirror experience in Cornwall, with clear images of past lives. It was something deeper, more primitive, a dissolution of the boundaries that separated their individual consciousnesses. Eloise could feel Adrian's thoughts as if they were her own. His memories, his fears, his most secret desires. The pain of believing he had lost Teresa and the baby. Years of self-flagellation in expensive clinics, trying to erase the guilt with substances that only deepened the abyss. The struggle to rebuild his life, to redeem the Cassian name, to use power and wealth for something beyond the perpetuation of privilege. And Adrian, in turn, experienced Heloise's inner world, the loneliness of the girl who grew up surrounded by half-truths, the void left by a mother she never knew, the silent strength developed through adversity, the determination to build a meaningful life despite circumstances, the ability to see beauty even in the darkest corners of existence. They were no longer two separate people, but an expanded consciousness that encompassed thousands of years of shared experiences. They could feel the weight of the original oath, made with blood and despair in an ancient land, the arrogance of believing that love could bend the will of the gods, and the terrible price paid through millennia. Hundreds of encounters, forbidden passions, violent separations, oaths renewed in moments of death that only perpetuated the cycle. Go deeper. The phrase echoed in their shared consciousness, and both understood its true meaning. It was not a physical request, but a spiritual one. It was a call for a connection that transcended the flesh, that went beyond romantic or sexual attraction, that touched the very essence of being. Simultaneously, they realized the nature of the trap they had fallen into. The true cycle was not of love and loss, but of separation and search. The illusion of being distinct entities, separate souls seeking completeness in the other. The truth, the terrible and liberating truth, was that there had never been real separation. They were different manifestations of the same essence, fragments of the same consciousness that eternally sought each other, without realizing that the union they so desired could only happen when they recognized that they had never truly been separate. The chalice slipped from their hands, falling to the stone floor. It did not break, but the water spread in a pattern that resembled a constellation or a map of something too grand to be comprehended. When the experience ceased, when they returned to feeling like separate individuals, something fundamental had changed. The desire they felt for each other, that disturbing attraction that defied conventions and labels, had transformed into something deeper. A recognition, an acceptance, and a comprehension that transcended the need for possession or consummation. Do you understand now? Teresa's voice broke the reverent silence. Adrian nodded slowly. The cycle continues because we keep seeking in the other what already exists within us, because we don't recognize our true nature. Separation is the illusion, Eloise completed, her voice strangely calm. The love we seek is not something to be possessed. It is something to be recognized, Teresa concluded, a sad smile playing on her lips. The cycle perpetuates not by the intensity of love, but by the way we express it, by the belief that we are separate, incomplete, needing another to complete us. Eloise walked to Teresa, finally facing the woman who had brought her into the world, only to deliver her into other arms. Why didn't you tell me sooner? Why wait all these years? Because you needed to find Adrian on your own. You needed to feel the attraction, experience the confusion, face your own demons. Teresa touched her daughter's face with trembling fingers. If I simply told you the truth, it would just be another fantastic story. You needed to experience it. A sudden noise interrupted the moment. Footsteps descending the spiral staircase, male voices rapidly approaching. Teresa paled. They found us. Who? Adrian asked, tense. The other guardians. Those who continue your father's work. Those who feed on the energy of the cycle. Before they could react, the hall door burst open violently. 3 men entered, all middle-aged, wearing dark suits, carrying weapons discreetly visible under their jackets. Teresa Almeida. The man at the front, tall and grey-haired, with a thin scar cutting across his left eyebrow, had a deep, controlled voice. So many years avoiding us only to end up exactly where it began. Victor Mendez. Teresa showed no surprise. Still serving the same masters? Serving order, continuity. Victor shifted his gaze to Adrian. Your father would be disappointed, Adrian. After all we did to keep you on the right path. Adrian took a step forward, instinctively placing himself between the newcomers and the 2 women. My father was a sick man, obsessed with power. Just like you and your associates. Victor smiled coldly. You don't understand, do you? Power is not the goal. It's just the means. What we seek is balance, the maintenance of cosmic order. He pointed to the fallen chalice. I see we arrived too late to prevent the ritual. But perhaps it's not too late to remedy the damage. What damage? Eloise asked, her voice firm despite the growing fear. The cycle should not be broken, child. Not yet, not by you. Victor gestured, and the 2 men behind him advanced, weapons now clearly visible. The energy you generate, life after life, it sustains more than you can imagine. Teresa moved quickly, positioning herself beside Adrian. They will no longer feed your little power club, Victor. It's over. Over? The man laughed, a humorless sound. Teresa, of all people, you should know. Nothing ends. Everything returns in cycles, like the seasons, like life and death, like love and hate. Some cycles need to be broken, Adrian countered. Some truths need to be confronted. Victor shook his head like a professor disappointed with promising students. Your father tried to explain this to you, Adrian. He tried to make you understand. The power of the cycle doesn't just benefit us, the guardians. It benefits reality itself. The energy generated by the suffering of your souls. It feeds structures that keep the fabric of existence intact. Eloise felt a shiver run down her spine. Are you saying our suffering is necessary? That we are condemned to repeat the cycle eternally for the greater good? Not eternally, only until another source of energy is found. Until humanity evolves enough to generate the necessary power through more benevolent means. Victor took a step forward. We don't expect you to understand, only that you fulfill your role as you have done for millennia. It was Teresa who moved first with surprising agility for her age. In a fluid movement, she pulled a small gun from inside her boot and aimed it not at Victor or his men, but at the largest mirror on the wall. Not this time. Victor. The gunshot was deafening in the enclosed space. The mirror exploded into 1,000 fragments, and with it something in the fabric of reality seemed to tear. A supernatural wind arose within the chamber, although there was no opening through which it could enter. The lights flickered, and impossibly long shadows stretched across the walls. Victor screamed, an expression of genuine panic disfiguring his controlled face. You mad woman! You don't know what you've done. I know exactly what I've done. Teresa smiled, a sad and triumphant smile at the same time. I broke your precious portal, the connection through which you channeled the energy of the cycle. The mirror fragments began to vibrate, slowly levitating, spinning like tiny satellites in chaotic orbits. Reflections of light danced on the walls, creating patterns that resembled symbols of a forgotten language. Victor recoiled, fear evident on his face. You've condemned us all. The barrier will collapse. No. Teresa held the gun steady. I merely opened the way for a new balance. The pieces of the mirror accelerated their macabre dance, the sound of glass against glass becoming almost unbearable. And then, as if responding to a silent command, they flew towards Victor and his henchmen. Not like projectiles, but like swarms of metallic insects, enveloping them in shimmering cocoons. The screams lasted only seconds. When the glass receded, falling inert to the floor, the three men had disappeared. There was no blood, no remains. It was as if they had never been there. The silence that followed was dense, palpable. What happened to them? Heloise asked, her voice trembling. Teresa slowly lowered the gun. They were taken to where they should be, where we all eventually end up. Did you know this would happen? Adrian looked at her with a mixture of awe and admiration. I suspected. Mirrors are not just tools of reflection, Adrian. They are portals, interfaces between realities. The Guardians used them to channel the energy of the cycle, to manipulate reality according to their desires. Teresa walked to the fallen fragments, touching them with her fingertips. By breaking the main portal, I created a momentary imbalance, a rift between worlds, and they were sucked in. Heloise tried to comprehend the incomprehensible. Let's just say the universe has its own way of balancing equations. Teresa smiled enigmatically. They used the suffering of countless souls to fuel their power games. The universe simply collected the debt. Adrian approached Teresa, his eyes glistening with contained tears. You planned all this from the beginning. Since you met me, she nodded slowly. Not in the details, but in the broad strokes, yes. When I discovered I was pregnant, when I understood that I was carrying a child born of the two souls imprisoned by the cycle, I knew it was a unique opportunity. Something that had never happened before in thousands of years. A new variable in the equation, Heloise murmured, understanding. Exactly. In all previous lives you met as strangers. You loved each other against all odds. You lost each other tragically, and you swore to reunite. Teresa sighed deeply. But never before had you created a life together. Never before had you created a blood bond that transcended the cycle itself. That's why you hid me, Heloise concluded. Not just from Augustus and his guardians, but from Adrian too. I needed to protect you until you were ready. Until you both were ready to face the truth. To break the cycle not through more death and blood oaths, but through the recognition of your true nature. A particularly loud clap of thunder shook the mansion's structure. The storm seemed to intensify, as if nature itself responded to the supernatural events occurring within. And now? Adrian asked, looking at the mirror fragments scattered across the floor. Is the cycle truly broken? Teresa walked to the stairs leading out of the underground chamber. Come, there's something you need to see. They followed her in silence, ascending the spiral staircase, passing through the ghostly corridors of the abandoned mansion, until they reached a balcony that offered a panoramic view of the forest and, in the distance, the city of London. The storm had abruptly ceased. The sky, previously laden with dark clouds, now opened in clearings that revealed impossibly bright stars. And on the horizon, where the metropolis pulsed in its eternal ballet of lights, something was different. The building, Heloise murmured, unable to comprehend what her eyes saw. The urban landscape had subtly altered. Buildings that shouldn't be there, constructions in architectural styles that had never existed in the London they knew, lights that moved in strange patterns, as if following slightly different physical logics. What's happening? Adrian's voice was a reverent whisper. Teresa leaned on the balcony railing, contemplating the transformed city. The breaking of the cycle, the destruction of the main portal, created ripples in reality. What you are seeing are echoes of other possibilities, of other worlds where choices were different, where paths diverged in directions we never explored. Is it permanent? Heloise asked, fascinated and terrified at the same time. No, reality is more resilient than the Guardians imagined. It will readjust, find a new balance. Teresa smiled at both of them. But you are free from the cycle. Your souls are no longer bound by the ancient oath. You can choose your own paths now. Heloise felt silent tears stream down her face. It was as if a weight she had carried all her life, for many lives, had suddenly disappeared. And what about us? She asked Teresa. You are my mother. Will you disappear again? Teresa touched her daughter's face tenderly. No, my role as guardian has ended, as protector of the secret, as catalyst of the process. Now I am just, Teresa, your mother, if you will allow me to be. Eloise hugged her impulsively, releasing years of unanswered questions, of absences that hurt like open wounds, of a longing she couldn't name until that moment. Adrian watched the scene with contained emotion, maintaining a respectful distance. When Teresa extended her arm, inviting him to join the embrace, he hesitated only an instant before accepting. The three remained united for a long moment, no longer prisoners of the cycle, no longer pieces in a cosmic game, just people who had crossed the impossible together and emerged on the other side, transformed but whole. When they finally separated, the first ray of morning sun broke the horizon, illuminating the city that slowly returned to its familiar form, the anomalies disappearing like mirages in the desert. "What do we do now?" Eloise asked, feeling simultaneously exhausted and awake, as if she had just been born. Teresa smiled, her eyes reflecting the growing light of the new day. "We live, my daughter. We simply live." 3 months had passed since the events at Cassian House. Autumn arrived in London, bringing cooler winds and skies of an almost painful blue. Eloise had resumed her studies at university, now with sufficient resources to dedicate herself fully to her literature course. She lived in a small apartment in Notting Hill, modest but comfortable, paid for with the money Teresa had saved during her years of reclusion. Teresa had rented a house in Chinatown, where she was beginning to rebuild her life now as a writer. She was working on a book that mixed fiction and reality, telling the story of souls trapped in cycles of love and loss through the centuries. A way to exorcise the past, she would say, when Eloise asked about the project. As for Adrian, he had initiated a radical transformation at Cassian and Roman. He eliminated suspicious businesses, cut ties with dubious partners, and directed significant resources towards social and environmental projects. The economic press spoke of ethical rebirth and new corporate philosophy. The relationship between the three was complex, delicate, being rebuilt day by day on entirely new foundations. Eloise and Adrian never again mentioned the attraction they felt before the cycle broke. That disturbing magnetism had transformed into something different, a deep connection that did not require physical or romantic manifestation. They were friends, confidants, souls who had shared millennia of history together. DNA tests were never done. As Teresa suggested, some mysteries deserved to remain untouched. Some bonds transcended biology and the limited logic of the material world. That Saturday afternoon, Eloise walked through Hyde Park, enjoying the gentle breeze and the generous shade of the trees. She had arranged to meet Teresa and Adrian for an informal picnic, a recent tradition they had established to maintain regular contact, to continue weaving the threads of this new relationship. She found them near the lake, sitting on a checkered blanket spread on the grass. Teresa was preparing sandwiches, while Adrian opened a bottle of white wine. The domesticity of the scene contrasted so strongly with the supernatural events they had shared that Eloise couldn't help but smile. "You look like a middle-aged couple on a Sunday in the park," she joked. Sitting down with them, Teresa laughed, handing her a glass of wine. "We're too old for any other role, don't you think? Some souls have lived long enough to appreciate simplicity." Adrian raised his glass in a silent toast. To simplicity, then, and to the freedom to choose our own paths. They drank in contemplative silence, each lost in their own thoughts. The park buzzed with life around them, families, couples, children running, dogs barking, distant music from some event. The normality was like a balm after the metaphysical whirlwind they had traversed. "Have you ever thought," Eloise began hesitantly, "that perhaps our meeting in this life, the way everything unfolded, perhaps it was just another variation of the cycle, a more complex, more elaborate form, but still part of the same pattern?" Adrian considered the question seriously. "It's possible. Perhaps cycles are never truly broken, only transformed. Perhaps life itself is an eternal cycle of encounters and separations, of patterns that repeat on different scales." "But now we have a choice," Teresa intervened. "That's the crucial point. We are no longer bound by a predetermined destiny, by an oath made with blood in a moment of despair. We can choose how we relate, how we move forward, how we love." "How we love," Eloise repeated thoughtfully. She looked at Adrian, finding in his eyes no longer that disturbing desire, but a deep understanding, a recognition that went beyond words. I think that's what the cycle never allowed us before. The possibility of loving freely, without compulsion, without inevitable tragedy. Adrian nodded slowly. Love without possession. Without the desperate need to merge with the other to feel complete. Because we are already complete, Eloise concluded. We always were. Separation was the illusion. Teresa observed the exchange with a serene smile. You have understood what took millennia to be revealed. The true purpose of the cycle, perhaps. It was not a punishment, but a lesson. One that needed to be learned through experience, not just told. A comfortable silence settled between them. Eloise nibbled a sandwich, observing the people around her, feeling a deep gratitude for the normality of the moment, for the simplicity of shared pleasures. It was then that she noticed a man sitting alone on a nearby bench. Something in his posture, in the way he observed the lake with distant eyes, captured her attention. He was young, perhaps a few years older than her, with dark hair and striking features that suggested indigenous ancestry. As if feeling her gaze, he turned. Their eyes met briefly, and Eloise felt an inexplicable familiarity, a recognition that made her heart skip a beat. It was not the compulsive attraction of the ancient cycle, but something gentler, more natural, like finding an old friend in an unexpected place. He smiled shyly before averting his gaze, returning his attention to a book he held in his hands. Eloise? Teresa's voice brought her back to the present moment. You seem far away. Sorry, I was just watching people. Teresa followed the direction of Eloise's gaze, noticing the solitary man on the bench. An enigmatic smile appeared on her lips. Interesting. What? Eloise asked, feeling her face inexplicably flush. Nothing. Just observing new cycles forming. Naturally this time. Adrian also looked, and instead of the tension or jealousy he might have felt in another life, in another configuration of souls, he felt only a quiet acceptance. Go talk to him, he said softly. Eloise looked at him, surprised. And why? Because now you can choose. Because all paths are open. Because some connections deserve to be explored, even if they are not written in the stars. Eloise hesitated, looking from Adrian to Teresa, unconsciously seeking approval or direction. Go, Teresa encouraged. We are free, remember? Free to create our own stories, our own meanings. Eloise slowly stood up, adjusting her dress, feeling a mixture of nervousness and anticipation that was completely human, completely normal, completely free from the weight of cosmic destinies and ancient oaths. You two are impossible, she murmured. But she smiled as she said it. She walked towards the young man on the bench, feeling simultaneously vulnerable and empowered. She didn't know what she would say when she reached him. She wasn't sure if the connection she felt was real or just an echo of the extraordinary events she had experienced. But for the first time in her life, in all her lives, uncertainty did not terrify her. It was just part of the journey. Part of the experience of being human, of living fully, of choosing freely. Behind her, Teresa and Adrian watched her with serene smiles, like proud parents, like devoted friends, like ancient souls who had finally learned the hardest lesson of all, that true love does not bind, does not possess, does not demand. It merely recognizes, accepts, and liberates. As Eloise approached the bench, the young man looked up from his book. He smiled, and in that smile there was no weight of millennia of tragedies, no inescapable destinies or blood oaths. It was just a man smiling at a woman in a sunny park, a possible beginning, a story yet unwritten. May I sit? She asked. Of course, he replied, moving to make space. And so, with a simple gesture, with common words, a new cycle began. Not of love and loss, not of passion and tragedy, but of open possibilities, of conscious choices, of hard-won freedom. On the horizon, the sun began its slow descent, painting the London sky with shades of orange and pink. But instead of an end, that sunset announced only transformation, renewal, the eternal restart that is life itself. Teresa looked at Adrian, her eyes shining with a mixture of ancient wisdom and renewed hope. Do you think she'll be all right? He nodded, watching Eloise chat animatedly with the stranger who no longer seemed so strange. She carries the best of us, the strength of someone who faced the impossible and emerged whole, the wisdom of someone who saw beyond the veil of ordinary reality. And love, Teresa added. Not the possessive, desperate love that imprisoned us for millennia, but the love that liberates, that recognizes, that celebrates individuality even in union. Adrian reached out, briefly touching Teresa's hand, a casual contact without the weight of ancient passion, just the comfort of souls who had shared an extraordinary journey. "Go deeper," he quoted thoughtfully. "I finally understand the true meaning." "And what is it?" Teresa asked, though her eyes suggested she already knew the answer. "It's not about physical or even spiritual union. It's about delving into one's own essence, recognizing the fundamental truth of who we are, beyond the roles we play, beyond the stories we tell ourselves." Teresa smiled, raising her glass in a silent toast to the future, not a future predetermined by ancient oaths or cosmic curses, but one built choice by choice, moment by moment, with the accumulated wisdom of thousands of years of experience. In the distance, Heloise laughed at something the young man had said. The sound carried the lightness of liberation, the genuine joy of someone who had finally learned to live in the present, without the weight of the past or the anxiety of the future. And so, under the sky that gradually filled with stars, three ancient souls silently celebrated the greatest of all achievements, the freedom to simply be, to choose their own path, to love without the chains of destiny, to plunge into life with the courage of someone who has already faced the abyss and discovered that, deep down, there is only light. In Heloise's apartment, weeks later, as she unpacked some boxes still lying around from her move, she found the old handkerchief with the name Lola embroidered in red thread. She smiled at the familiar touch of the worn fabric, at the memories of the grandmother who had raised her with love, even knowing she wasn't her biological granddaughter. Near the window, a small oval mirror hung, catching the last rays of the setting sun, creating golden reflections that danced on the walls. Heloise approached, observing her own reflection with new eyes. She saw now not only the 23-year-old woman who had struggled against difficult circumstances, but all the women she had been, the Egyptian priestess, the French lady, the indigenous woman of colonial Brazil, hundreds of incarnations, hundreds of stories that composed the complex tapestry of her soul. And she also saw the woman she could now become, free from the chains of the cycle, master of her own destiny. A woman who knew the value of true love, not as desperate possession, but as serene recognition of the interconnectedness of all things. Her phone vibrated in her pocket. A message from Paul, the young man she had met in the park. An invitation to dinner, to continue the conversation that flowed so naturally between them, to explore the connection that didn't have the overwhelming intensity of the ancient cycle, but a quiet depth that promised genuine discoveries. Heloise smiled, replying affirmatively. She carefully placed Lola's handkerchief in a small carved box, a gift from Teresa, made of the same material as the box that had guarded the secrets for so many years. A reminder that the past did not need to be forgotten for the present to be full. She prepared for the meeting with the simplicity of someone who had nothing left to prove, nothing to desperately seek, nothing to fear. In her heart she now carried the certainty that Teresa had tried to convey from the beginning, that separation was an illusion, that true love was not a search, but a recognition, and that the only way to truly go deeper was to fully immerse herself in the experience of being alive, in the everyday miracle of ordinary existence. Before leaving, she cast one last look at the mirror. For a fleeting instant, she seemed to see not only her reflection, but those of Teresa and Adrian beside her, and behind them, in infinite layers of possibility, all the faces they had been, all the possible configurations of their intertwined souls, and she knew, with a certainty that transcended reason, that she had never truly been alone, that the cycle, with all its pain and beauty, with all its hard-learned lessons, had been merely the long and tortuous path to this moment of understanding, that deep down, at the deepest of all levels, everything was as it should be, perfect in its imperfection, complete in its incompleteness, eternal in its transience. She closed the door as she left, not as an end, but as another step in the infinite spiral that was life.